Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is a ghostwriter, and she founded the ghostwriting business Connected Ghostwriting, as well as the nonprofit organization Journey to Success. Her own book, The Power of the Pivot, will be released on May 5th, 2026. Her name is Maria Chapman, and my interview with Maria will follow the note-taking sounds. Maria Chapman, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Thank you, Aaron, for having me.
You are the founder of a company called Connected Ghostwriting. What genres of books does Connected Ghostwriting provide ghostwriting services for, and does the company provide types of ghostwriting services other than book ghostwriting as well?
Yes, we do. So Connected Ghostwriting writes books for folks in the mental health and social justice spaces. So if you're in mental health, wellness, or social justice, we can help write your books. We stick to that niche because it allows us to be a little bit more exacting and build great relationships with publishers who publish books in those spaces. So we do write books. We also offer book coaching and developmental editing for people who aren't in need of full manuscript writing services. And we offer web writing services to our clients as well. So we have clients who come to us for their book and then stick around and have us do their website and all their blogs as well. And we have people who come for the blogs and stay for the books.
If I understand correctly, Sue Toth, who I interviewed previously on the Apollo Papyrus podcast, I think it was last year,
Yes.
Works for Connected Ghostwriting. What is it like to have Sue as one of your employees?
So I actually just finished my book and sent it to the publisher this week. And in the acknowledgement section, I thanked Sue because what I said was, without her, I would always spell the HTE. And then in the book, I do explain that bringing Sue on, she was my first hire once I decided to stop being freelance and go agency model. And bringing her on gave me more freedom with my writing, whether I'm writing for myself or for a client, because knowing that she would come up behind me and clean up my messes just allowed a lot more freedom of expression. The other thing she's very good at is telling me to turn off my perfectionism. So this book project I just finished, I kept going back in and saying, oh, I've got to add this. I've got to add that. I've got to add this. What about this? And this book is a guide for entrepreneurship for people with disabilities. And she just said, stop, just stop. You can write another book. And you really, as a writer, you need an editor who is kind with their feedback, but also willing to step in and calm you down when you need it.
You are also the founder of Journey to Success. What services does Journey to Success provide?
Thank you for asking. Journey to Success is my new passion project. It's been in the works for about 3 years. And we're a new nonprofit. We work with folks who are disabled mid-career. So think of someone who develops a chronic illness or has an injury that makes it impossible for them to continue in the career they were trained for and have been working in for some time. And we help with asynchronous learning. We have an online course academy that's launching at the end of the summer that guides folks through the process of starting a business when you have a disability. And we also offer one-to-one mentorship and coaching. And on top of that, we do offer some startup funds to people who have made it through those programs. So we helped a nutritionist who specializes in working with folks with autoimmune conditions, launch an online course and associated subscription and membership services. We're working right now with a woman that has a product-based business and helping her scale that into something that provides for her family. And we're really working on a model of avoiding burnout because when you have a chronic illness or a disability, that is a very, very real threat at all times. And we're also looking at ways to do entrepreneurship a little bit differently than the narrative that you have to have 16-hour days to be successful.
You became disabled in your mid 30s, kind of around the age I'm right now, maybe just a little older. What is your disability, and what was it like to have to relearn how to do very basic things such as walking all over again?
Ooh, yeah. So I have chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy and myasthenia gravis. And I was diagnosed at 37, but I started developing symptoms when I was 35. And in 2019, I was hospitalized. I was paralyzed. My legs didn't work. My arms didn't work. My jaw didn't work. So I actually couldn't talk for several days while I was in the hospital. And with both of those conditions, rest makes things better. So I left the hospital using a walker, and I needed to use the walker in the house and a wheelchair out of the house for about 6 months. And I've had other flares where I've had different levels of walking stolen from me, and other things. Now, before I got sick, I was a weightlifter, a runner, and I worked in the education field for 15 years. And I lost all of that. And so the and this is something I go through in my book too. The first thing when that happens to you that you have to address is that grief. And people talk about grief when it comes to death, but we don't talk about grief when it comes to losing pieces of yourself or maybe losing things that you had tied into your entire identity. And so in addition to relearning how to walk and relearning how to use hands that didn't quite work the way I was used to, I also had to relearn who I was. And that led to kind of a shift in my value system that really guided my starting work as a freelance writer and then a ghostwriter and then my agency. And then that's what led to starting the nonprofit as well. But it really is just a huge shift in who you are as a person when something like that happens. And so the struggle of learning how to walk, I say in my book that entrepreneurship is a lot like learning how to walk, because if you ever watch a toddler who's learning how to walk, sometimes they need the support of a couch. Sometimes they can take a couple steps across the room. Sometimes they fall and they cry. Sometimes they fall down and they get right back up and keep running. And entrepreneurship is a lot like that. Recovering from a disability or a chronic illness is a lot like that. And finding a new way of living when the life you had is just suddenly gone is also a similar process.
As you've mentioned a couple of times, you have a book under your own name, Part-Time Entrepreneur, that is soon to be published, if I understand correctly. Without spoiling too much about your upcoming book, can you provide a preview of what your book will be about?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes. And I think we've changed the title. I think we're leaning towards the power of the pivot right now, for a lot of different reasons. But the book is being published by Morgan James, and I know you've recently interviewed some folks from Morgan James on the podcast. And it is my story, but I've also brought in several other disabled entrepreneurs to share their story in the book, which was really, really fun for me to have those conversations. And I included those stories sort of to say that it's not just me. Other people do this too, right? I've got a network of several entrepreneurs with disabilities who have been very successful. And in the book, I walk readers through the process I used for building my business with the help of coaches and online courses. And my mentor is Nick Pavlidis, who is the owner of Authority Ghostwriting and also the CEO of Morgan James Publishing. He was integral in my success as an entrepreneur. And so I walked through the process that I used to start my business in the hopes that it helps other people do the same. So there's a lot of story, a lot of narrative nonfiction in there, but there's also a lot of here's how to set up finances for your business. And these are the things you need to do to ascertain market viability. And here's some marketing tips. And here's how to network when you have a disability, right? Because we can't necessarily network in the traditional ways all the time. We can't necessarily work a full day and then go to a networking event at night and be charming and awake. And so here's the traditional entrepreneurship advice, and then let's modify it for folks with disabilities.
I'm going to pivot back to ghostwriting, your ghostwriting work for the rest of the interview. What drew you into being and to becoming a ghostwriter, and what do you love most about helping others tell their stories?
What drew me in initially? A couple of things. So there's both the way it felt and also very practical reasons that freelance writing and then ghostwriting made sense. So as I said, I worked in education, but I was always in the literacy side of education. So I was a literacy specialist in elementary schools. I taught kids how to read and write. I taught teachers how to teach reading and writing. And so I was always in that space. And when I was sitting in the hospital, the first thing that started working was my hands. And at that point, I hadn't written anything in about 9 years that wasn't related to a master's degree program or curriculum writing for the district I worked in. But because my jaw didn't work, I couldn't talk. I was sitting in the hospital, not much to do. I'm not much of a TV watcher. I started writing and I started publishing articles on Medium. And I had a few that were picked up and syndicated and did really well. And the truth is, writing has always been my pipe dream, like that thing out there, like if I could do anything I wanted for the rest of my life, what would I do? And the answer was always, I would write. And so I started doing it and found some success. And I took on a few freelance clients, just taking care of websites and blogs and other writing tasks that they needed. And one of them asked me if I would ghostwrite their book. And she was someone whose native language was Spanish. I happen to speak Spanish. She struggled with writing in English. And what struck me most about that experience was the synergy between what I did in schools and what I'm doing now. So there's a lot of coaching involved, and I was an instructional coach in the schools. But the other thing that it reminds me of is when we had students with disabilities who struggled with writing for one reason or another. Maybe they're dyslexic, or maybe they have an expressive language disorder. We would often scribe for them when there was a big assignment, and we knew they had the ideas in their head, but they couldn't get it out onto the paper. And that's what ghostwriting is like. It's taking the ideas of the person I'm working with and packaging them with a pretty bow and getting them out into the world. And I work with entrepreneurs who maybe have a language issue, or I have several clients who have dyslexia, or I have clients who just don't have the time to write their own book. And then I also have clients who hire me because of the strategy work that I provide, right? So I have relationships with publishers, I have relationships with marketing folks and PR folks. And so when I'm writing a book with a client, we're talking a lot about market positioning and how to make this sell. And what do we offer in addition to the book so that it fits into the whole ecosystem of your business, right? So if you're a therapist, what do you specialize in? Let's write your book about that. And then we create an online course to go with it. And maybe you host retreats as well, so that the money you're making isn't just from book sales and you're really building a business around this expertise. And so what I do is this combination of taking on someone's identity, right? So that I'm writing their ideas, and that feels like acting. And then there's the writing piece of it. And that's my first love. And then there's the coaching through the strategy and the positioning. So I've got all those things that I really love to do sort of woven into one. And then on top of it, this is a job that these are the practical things, right? This is a job that I can do from anywhere. Yesterday, I had a meeting with a client. I sat at a picnic table at a park, pulled up Zoom, and did the client meeting in between physical therapy and another doctor's appointment. And when you're navigating life with a chronic illness, it's just a matter of fact that you have more doctor's appointments than the typical person. And being able to fit my work life around that is the reason that I've been able to recover as well as I have. And so when I'm helping other entrepreneurs, one of the things we look at is what are you really good at, what that you enjoy doing, right? And I have the writing and the coaching. Those are my two big things. So what are you really good at that you love doing that other people either don't love doing or struggle with, right? And there are so many people out there who struggle with writing for one reason or another. So if you can find that thing for yourself, and it's something that you can do on a flexible basis, you can do it any time of day, right? Um, then it just becomes a lot more feasible when you're navigating life with an illness or disability. And so it's both the things I love to do, but also the practical aspects of what does a business need to look like in order to be viable for someone like me.
What are some of the most rewarding, interesting, and/or surprising projects you've worked on as a ghostwriter, and how did they challenge or inspire you?
That's a great question. The one of my favorite book projects to date was a little outside of our typical niche. So it was a client that we had worked for who was in the mental health space, and we'd written plenty of mental health content for her. And then she pivoted into coaching mental health providers in starting private practice. And she wanted to write a book about her coaching program. And so writing that book meant that I was learning all of her MBA business brain information while I was writing. I was writing to therapists, which is, the audience that I write to for all the content I create for Connected Ghostwriting. So I'm very familiar with them as ideal clients and as an audience. And so that wasn't hard, but there was a lot of learning that had to happen for me to write that book effectively. But the other thing that happened is it made me better at running my business, right? So I like to say that I write the books I would pay to read anyway. And that one was a fantastic example of that. And then recently I worked with two authors, Chrissy and Ray, and their book is coming out in August. They are very public about having worked with me, so I can say their names. And I am so grateful that they're so public about working with me because most of my clients are not. That's what ghostwriting is. We hide under a sheet and write and don't let anyone know who did the writing. But they thanked me in the acknowledgments and they thanked me prolifically on social media. And I'm very grateful for that. And so that was surprising for me because in what's 2025. So in the almost 6 years that I've been writing professionally, I've only had a handful of people publicly declare that Maria is the person who writes my content. And so the fact that they shared that for their whole book project, I was really grateful for. I also loved that project because one of the things I got to do was interview other women that they've touched with their brand is called The Power to Be. And so they've reached a lot of women and inspired a lot of women. And I got to connect with those women and gather their stories for the book. So that was a lot of fun for me as well.
As a ghostwriter, how do you capture someone else's voice in an authentic manner while weaving in your own creativity and expertise?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my creativity and expertise has a lot to do with writing craft and how to write effective and entertaining text, right? And so I can apply that to anything. The mastering someone else's voice is the piece of ghostwriting that I find I have to train my writers on the most. And there are a couple of things that we do as an agency that really help with that. So the first thing we do is when we have a new client come on, we are collecting any podcast interviews they've done. If they have their own podcast, we are listening to every episode of that. If they have other books out, we're reading those. If they have none of that, but they have a paper they wrote in college, right? We're looking at things that they've written themselves as a first step. And then I do all of the client interaction. We're keeping the agency small because I love that piece of it and I don't want to let that go. I might change my mind on that at some point, but for now, I like providing the direct customer interaction. And so I interview clients usually via Zoom. We record the interviews. And so the writer that is writing their book, whether it's me or one of the writers I have on staff, is one of the things that we do is they get the recording, they get the transcript of the recording, but they also get my notes from the interview. And my notes from the interview are not the content of the interview typically, although there is some of that in there. What I'm looking for are the turns of phrase a person uses regularly. I'm looking for the way a person organizes their ideas. So most of my clients talk about things like depression and anxiety, right? Because I work in the mental health space, but they talk about it differently and they have different ways of approaching it. And so, partly because of my education background, I'm very good at listening to someone describe the complexity of what they do and distilling it down into simple, jargon free language that can actually reach their reader. And so it's that back and forth, it's that nuance, but it's also silly things like making sure that if someone has a phrase they say all the time, we include that in the book. And I can't say the one that I'm thinking of right now because it'll give away the client, and I have an NDA, so I'm not going to do that. But we all have things that we say regularly, whether it's a joke or something a little bit self-depreciating. We all have something we say regularly that becomes sort of our catchphrase. And one of mine is entrepreneurship is a lot like learning how to walk. So if someone was ghostwriting my book and it had anything to do with entrepreneurship or disability and they didn't include that line, they would be ignoring my voice. So it's a process. It takes a lot of time to master someone's voice. The longer we write for someone, the better we get at it. And that's one of the reasons we offer all of the writing services we do, because once someone has written a book with us, it's so much easier for us to just handle their content for them going forward.
How do you celebrate your achievements when, due to the nature of your work as a ghostwriter, much of your work is anonymous behind someone else's name?
So that question is actually gets to the root of what we believe celebrations are supposed to be. And there's two different kinds of celebrating, right? There's public celebration when we want to shout from the rooftops about an achievement, and social media is great for that. But then there's the quieter sorts of celebrations. And so those are things that I share with my husband, with my kids. Ooh, we finished a book today and it's, we have a little dance party or a nice dinner or something like that. I definitely celebrate with the clients when they hit their milestones. But if I'm being entirely honest, celebrating is something that I'm working on. I've not always been good at stopping and enjoying sort of the wonder of a moment of accomplishment. I have a tendency to jump right into the next thing. So, and my husband jokes about this with me all the time. When I got the book contract from Morgan James, he said, okay, are we celebrating now or do we celebrate when you send the book in? Do we celebrate when you get the book copies? Where's the celebration? And one of the things I've learned is that it makes a lot more sense to celebrate in smaller ways and celebrate often. Excuse me. And so if we're talking about a client book, then I'm celebrating when we sign the contract. I'm celebrating again when we finish the first draft. I'm celebrating again when we finish the final draft.
Understand. One final question to finish this interview. What is the biggest lesson you've learned from balancing a demanding professional career with the realities of living with a disability?
The biggest challenge and most important piece of this, so it's both things, is defining what your non-negotiables are and then sticking to them. And so that looks like making a list of what you need in your life in order to be healthy and well. Because if you're not healthy, your business will not be healthy. If you're not healthy, you can't put as much effort into your relationships, your parenting, all of those things you value. And so defining your non-negotiables is the most important part of this puzzle. For me, those non-negotiables are daily walks, exercise. I see a personal trainer 3 times a week. That's non-negotiable for me. It is a medical appointment. I do not skip it. I have monthly myofascial release appointments. I have monthly infusions that are 8 hours long. They used to be weekly. And now we've reduced to once a month. It's also non-negotiable for me to have time set aside with my family each day. And so the first 2 hours in the morning when I'm getting my kids ready for school, that's a non-negotiable. My phone stays in the bedroom. I am not working. The last piece of the day where we're doing dinners and bedtimes, those are non-negotiable. And does that mean I never do an evening event? No, I'll schedule things. But if I have time set aside for family, that is a non-negotiable. And so scheduling my life with those non-negotiables first means that figuring out how much time I have to work in a given week is a math problem. It's not a, oh, I feel overwhelmed. Oh, I'm behind. It's, I have 15 hours. And in those 15 hours, I am going to do some sort of professional development and improve my business, my practice, my craft of writing. I am going to do some actual writing. I'm going to meet with clients and I'm going to market. And if I do those 4 tasks every week in whatever time I have, then I'm doing my best and things will grow. But figuring out those non negotiables first and then putting boundaries in place to protect them is both the most important piece and the hardest piece.
Maria, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were an amazing and insightful guest.
Thank you, Aaron. You're a wonderful interviewer.
I previously interviewed Sue Toth, who works for Connected Ghostwriting, so it's been amazing to interview both Sue and Maria for this podcast, and I'll include a link to my interview of Sue in the text description of this episode. I wish Maria the best with her own book, The Power of the Pivot. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2025, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.